There is a specific kind of terror that only exists when you are stranded. It's not the jump scare in a movie or the sudden shock of a loud noise. It is a cold, creeping realization that you are entirely alone, cut off from the safety of society, and that the darkness stretching out in front of you is hiding something predatory. Most of us get into our cars, turn up the music, and assume that the biggest threat we face is running out of gas or getting a speeding ticket. But for a select few, a simple mechanical failure or a wrong turn on a lonely highway transforms a mundane Tuesday night into a fight for survival. Tonight, we are going to drive down roads where the cell service dies and the rules of civilization don't apply. We are going to explore the thin line between the traveler and the victim, and hear from three people who learned the hard way that when the engine cuts out and the lights go out, you are no longer the driver, you are the prey. If you have ever felt that shiver of unease while driving down a dark country road, or if you've ever looked in your rearview mirror and wondered if the car behind you is following a little too close, then you know exactly the kind of instinct we're talking about today. We rely on that instinct to keep us safe, but sometimes, no matter how fast you run or how smart you are, the darkness finds a way to catch up. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn off the lights. These are stories about people who stared into the abyss of human depravity and somehow managed to make it back to tell the tale. Get comfortable, lock your doors, and let's dive into the nightmare. The story begins more than 3 decades ago, in a time before the world was connected by the invisible web of the internet. A time when, if you broke down, you were truly on your own. Our narrator, a younger man full of the optimism and invincibility of youth, had spent the day helping his best mate move from their home in Newcastle down to the bustling, gritty city of Glasgow. His friend had landed a dream job as a football scout for Rangers, a massive break that warranted the long, exhausting drive. They had spent the day hauling boxes, sharing laughs, and celebrating the new chapter in his friend's life. By the time they finished unloading the last of the furniture and settled in for a hearty meal of pub grub and a few pints to wash away the dust of the move, the hour had grown late. It was well past midnight when our narrator finally climbed back into his trusty Vauxhall Cavalier, an '82 model that he had bought for a song and had served him faithfully for years. He was tired, perhaps a little too tired to be driving, but the road back to Newcastle was familiar, and he just wanted to sleep in his own bed. The drive was initially smooth, the rhythmic hum of the engine acting as a lullaby as he cut through the Scottish night. The radio was droning with a late-night phone-in, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the day. It wasn't until he passed the quiet town of Jedburgh, crossing the border back into England, that the atmosphere shifted. He noticed it before he heard it, the smell of something sweet and acrid wafting through the vents. Then, the temperature warning light on the dashboard flickered to life, a small red eye glowing in the dark. He glanced down and watched with a sinking heart as the needle nudged its way past the safe zone and into the menacing red. He cursed softly, easing off the accelerator, hoping against hope that he could coax just a few more miles out of the overheating engine. He cranked the heater up to full blast, a desperate mechanic's trick to pull heat away from the engine block. But this time, luck was not a lady he could woo. A loud, ominous hiss erupted from under the bonnet, followed immediately by a cloud of steam that billowed up from the seams of the hood, obscuring his vision through the windshield. It was followed by the sickening sound of metal knocking against metal, a death knell for an engine pushed too far. He coasted to a stop on the hard shoulder, the car groaning one last time before seizing up completely. Silence descended, heavy and absolute, broken only by the frantic ticking of the cooling engine and the rhythmic click of his hazard lights. He sat there for a moment, stunned, his heart hammering in his chest, before letting out a string of profanities that did nothing to alleviate the situation. He stepped out into the chill night air, popping the hood and releasing a fresh wave of steam and the smell of burnt coolant that stung his eyes. As he waved the steam away, the beam of his flashlight caught the culprit, a jagged crack in the top radiator hose. Green antifreeze was pouring onto the asphalt, pooling like a toxic neon lake. He didn't have a spare hose. He didn't have enough water to fix it. And even if he did, he knew the engine had seized too badly to trust it again. He was stranded, miles from anywhere, with no mobile phone and no hope of a quick rescue. Resignation set in. He locked the car, leaving the hazards flashing as a beacon of hope, and began to walk. The emergency phone, he reckoned, was at least a mile away, probably more. The darkness was absolute, the moon hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, and the only light came from the small torch in his hand and the distant glow of the stars. He walked cautiously along the grass verge, keeping as far from the traffic as possible, though the road was eerily empty. It was during this walk, this trudge into the unknown, that he saw it. Hidden behind a long overgrown hedgerow was a dirt track that led away from the road, and at the end of it he could make out the silhouette of a large three-story farmhouse. It felt like a miracle. While the ground floor was pitch black, there was a faint, flickering glow in the upstairs window's candlelight. It meant someone was home. He knew it was late, knew it was rude to knock on a stranger's door in the middle of the night, but the alternative, walking miles along a dangerous motorway in the pitch black, was far worse. As he walked up the dirt track, however, that initial wave of relief began to curdle into unease. The closer he got, the more the house revealed its secrets. It was run down, practically derelict. The windows on the ground floor were either cracked or boarded up with old newspaper. The wood was rotting, and the paint was peeling in long, thick strips. It looked like the kind of place that had been abandoned for years. Yet there were candles burning upstairs. The bad vibes radiating from the structure were physical, a pressure in his chest telling him to turn back. But he pushed the thought away, chiding himself for judging a book by its cover. He needed help, and these people were his only option. Foolishly, bravely, he approached the door and knocked. He kept his knocks polite, not wanting to startle whoever lived inside. Silence answered him. He waited, listening for footsteps, for the creak of floorboards, for a whisper. There was nothing. He knocked again, a little louder. Still nothing. Then he took a step back and looked up at the upstairs windows, and his blood ran cold. Behind a grime-streaked curtain, a face was peeking out at him. He couldn't make out features, just the pale oval of a face and the unmistakable glint of eyes staring down at him. As soon as he registered the gaze, the face vanished, and the house seemed to come alive. He began to hear voices, muffled and indistinct, whispering among themselves. It sounded like a group, maybe half a dozen people, plotting in the shadows. His instincts screamed at him to run, but he stood frozen, torn between the need for help and the terror of the unknown. Then a sound cut through the whispers, a laugh. It was low wheezing, a sound of amusement that sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't a neighborly chuckle, it was the laugh of someone watching a rat scurry through a maze. That was the breaking point. The bad vibes ramped up to 11, and survival instinct took the wheel. He didn't wait to see who would come to the door. He turned and walked briskly back down the dirt path, forcing himself not to run until he was out of sight of the windows. He could feel eyes on his back, burrowing into his skull, watching his every move. As he rounded the bend of the hedgerow and stepped back onto the verge of the main road, a new sensation hit him. It was the smell of burning, not wood or leaves, but something chemical and fierce. He looked toward where he had left his car and saw the glow before he understood what it was. His car was engulfed in flames. A scream tore from his throat, involuntary and raw. It wasn't just an accident. It was a message. He sprinted toward the burning vehicle, but it was a lost cause. The fire had taken hold with a vengeance, consuming the interior and melting the glass. There was nothing he could do but stand there shouting into the void, looking around for the culprits. But the road was empty. The house was silent. He was alone with the fire. In that moment, the reality of his situation crashed down on him. Whoever was in that house hadn't just ignored him. They had lured him in, terrified him, and then destroyed his only means of escape. They were hunting him. Panic seized him and he began to jog along the motorway, putting as much distance between himself and that hellish farmhouse as possible. He stuck to the shadows, his mind racing with paranoia. Every passing car felt like a threat, every rustle in the wind a footstep behind him. He didn't dare try to flag anyone down, terrified that the people in the car might be connected to the house. For 30 minutes, he moved like a ghost, adrenaline dulling the ache in his legs and the burn in his lungs. Eventually, he saw headlights approaching a Land Rover. Desperation overtook caution. He stepped out to the edge of the road and stuck out his thumb. The vehicle slowed down, but instead of offering a friendly ride, the passenger window rolled down, and a blinding torchlight was shined directly into his face. It was aggressive, interrogating. The driver didn't turn on the interior light. He squinted against the glare, his heart sinking. This wasn't a rescue. It was another trap. A voice called out, "Need a lift, pal?" It was friendly enough on the surface, but the tone was wrong, tight and menacing. He hesitated, and in that split second of indecision, the passenger doors of the Land Rover flew open. "Get him!" a voice shouted. He didn't think. He reacted. He threw himself off the road and into the dense thicket of trees and bushes that lined the verge. He scrambled through the undergrowth, thorns tearing at his clothes and skin, branches whipping his face. He closed his eyes to protect them, feeling the brush scratched at his cheeks, pushing through the pain with a surge of terrified energy. He burst through the tree line and found himself facing a barbed wire fence. In that moment, fear gave him powers he didn't know he possessed. He vaulted the fence like an Olympic athlete, clearing it with inches to spare, and landed hard on the other side. He didn't look back. He ran across the dark, open field, his lungs burning, his legs pumping, driven by the primal fear of what those men would do if they caught him. He ran until his chest felt like it was going to burst, until he was staggering rather than sprinting. When he finally reached another road on the far side of the field, he dropped to his knees, gasping for air. As he looked back across the field, he saw the Land Rover crawling along the road, a spotlight sweeping the darkness, searching for him. They were hunting him like an animal. He realized he couldn't stay on the roads. He turned and ran into another field, zigzagging through the darkness, changing his routes to avoid capture. This pattern continued for what felt like an eternity, field to road to field, until he finally stumbled into the outskirts of a small town. The silence here was different. It was the peaceful silence of sleep, not the predatory silence of the moors. He walked the empty streets, dazed and terrified, until the flashing blue lights of a police cruiser appeared. An officer asked him what he was doing, and the story came pouring out in a rush of hysteria and relief. At the station, clutching a cup of tea and shivering, he recounted the nightmare. When he mentioned the house and the people inside, he noticed a look pass between the two officers. They told him the house was derelict, a known squatting spot, but certainly not a place with residents. They confirmed his worst fear. Whoever was in there shouldn't have been, and they definitely weren't the welcoming type. They asked him why he thought they had burned his car. The officer didn't mince words. "Well, what did you see?" It was a chilling question. They implied that the squatters were hiding something illegal, something that required the removal of any witnesses. But our narrator hadn't seen anything. He was just a guy with a broken-down car. The police theorized that he had been mistaken for a bailiff or an officer of the law, and when they realized he was just a civilian, he became fair game for a terrifying lesson in keeping one's mouth shut. He was driven to the train station at dawn, leaving the burning car and the shadowy figures behind him. The police called him days later to say the house was empty and there was no evidence. It was a closed door, a cold case. But for him, the memory of those eyes in the window and the fire on the roadside would never fade. If you think that story was terrifying, imagine if the threat didn't come from a house in the middle of nowhere, but from the vehicle right in front of you. Our next story takes us to the desolate highways of the American Southwest, a place where the heat radiates off the asphalt long after the sun goes down, and the isolation is absolute. It was September 2016, and our narrator, a 31-year-old woman driving from Los Angeles to Phoenix to visit an old high school friend, made a decision that would haunt her for years. She had spent a wonderful weekend catching up, laughing, and reminiscing. She had planned to leave on Sunday afternoon, but time got away from her. It wasn't until 9 p.m. that she finally got behind the wheel, a delay that would put her on the road during the witching hour. She crossed the Arizona state line just after midnight, passing through Riverside County. The area was sparse, dotted with empty complexes and the occasional airport. But as she drove further out, the signs of civilization vanished. It was just her car, and the endless ribbon of blacktop. She was fighting to stay awake, blasting the air conditioning and singing along to the radio to keep her eyes open. That's when she saw the headlights. They appeared in her rearview mirror, approaching with terrifying speed. Her first thought was that it was a police officer. She checked her speed, relaxed her grip on the wheel, and prepared to move over. But the car didn't pass. It pulled up right behind her, tailgating her so closely that the glare from its headlights flooded her interior, blinding her. She could feel her heart rate pick up, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the steering wheel. Why were they doing this? Minutes passed, feeling like hours, until the car finally dropped back. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding, thinking the ordeal was over. But instead of speeding past the car, a large, black sliding door van with heavily tinted windows pulled alongside her and then moved in front. It began to drive erratically, slowing down and speeding up, blocking her path. She could slow down to create distance, but she didn't want to engage. She just wanted them to go away. Then, the rear doors of the van swung open. The sight was surreal and horrifying. A man dressed in leather, his face covered by a bandana, was crouched in the opening. He wasn't just riding, he was smiling. She could see the crinkle of his eyes, a look of sadistic amusement. He reached down and grabbed something heavy, something metal. She watched in a state of paralyzed disbelief. It was a disconnect between her eyes and her brain. She couldn't process what was happening until it was too late. The man held the object up and tossed it out of the van. It hit the road and bounced once, a chaotic, spinning mass of iron, and then it was airborne, coming straight at her windshield. It was an engine block. Time seemed to slow down. She reacted on pure instinct, twisting the wheel violently to the right. The heavy piece of metal smashed into her windshield on the passenger side, shattering the glass and collapsing the roof inward with a deafening crash. It missed her body by inches. If she hadn't turned, if she hadn't swerved, she would have been decapitated. She slammed on the brakes, the car screeching and spinning across the lane until it came to a halt on the shoulder. She sat there, shaking uncontrollably, surrounded by broken glass and the terrifying reality of how close she had come to death. She dialed 911, her voice trembling as she tried to explain the impossible that someone in a van had thrown an engine at her car. When the operator transferred her, the dam broke, and she collapsed into tears. The police and EMS arrived, guiding her through the shock. Aside from some cuts and severe whiplash, she was physically fine, but mentally, she was fractured. The doctor and the officers all told her how lucky she was. Lucky felt like the wrong word. Lucky was finding a $20 bill. Surviving an attempted murder by flying engine block felt like something else entirely. The question that tormented her wasn't how she survived, but why? Why her? Why target a random woman on a lonely highway? Was it a game? Was it a thrill kill? The police never found the van. A black van with no plates, in the middle of the desert. In the middle of the night, it was a ghost. It was a phantom that existed only to haunt her nightmares. She realized that the randomness of the attack was what made it so terrifying. There was no motive she could understand, no conflict she could resolve. It was just pure, unadulterated malice, cruising down the highway, looking for a victim to turn into hamburger meat. And that thought, the thought that evil can just exist without reason, was harder to live with than the physical scars. Our final story takes us from the lonely highways of Arizona to the sprawling emptiness of the Texas night. It is a story about the people who drive us, the strangers we trust to get us from point A to point B, and the thin veneer of civility that keeps society from collapsing into chaos. Hank is a bus driver, a proud Texan who spends his nights behind the wheel of a massive rig, ferrying sleepy travelers from Houston to El Paso. He loves his job, in a way. He feels like a night watchman, guarding the state under the vast canopy of stars. But he knows that the night brings out the madness in people, the darkness, the isolation, the fatigue. It strips away the layers of social conditioning and reveals the beast underneath. In the fall of 2007, Hank was driving a run from Dallas to Austin. The bus was relatively full, a microcosm of society tired and trying to get home. About an hour into the drive, the mood shifted. It started with muttering. One of the passengers, a man sitting 6 rows back, began to talk to himself. At first it was just noise, a low hum that was easily ignored. But as the miles ticked by, the volume rose. He wasn't having a conversation. He was having an argument with an invisible entity. Tension began to ripple through the bus. Passengers shifted in their seats, exchanging glances, pretending not to notice while keeping a wary eye on the situation. Hank watched it all in his rearview mirror, his gut tightening. He had seen this before. He knew the signs of a pressure cooker about to explode. The explosion didn't come with a warning, or perhaps the warning was the screaming that preceded it. Another passenger, tired of the disruption, told the man to shut up. It was the spark that ignited the powder keg. The muttering man roared, a sound of pure, unbridled rage, and launched himself across the aisle. He didn't just push, he attacked. He landed on top of the man who had spoken up, and his fists began to rain down. It was a beating, not a fight. The sound of fists impacting flesh was sickeningly audible over the hum of the engine. Chaos erupted. People screamed, some rushing forward to help, others scrambling to the back to escape. The bus became a moving cage of violence. The attacker was strong, fueled by a manic energy, and he easily fought off the Good Samaritans who tried to intervene. He knocked one man unconscious, the victim's face a bloody mess, before turning his attention back to the first target. Hank knew he had to stop the bus. He couldn't let this continue while he was driving 60 miles an hour. He began to slow down, guiding the heavy vehicle to the shoulder of the road. It felt agonizingly slow. Every second that passed was another second of violence. He finally brought the bus to a halt and threw the doors open. "Get out," he screamed, urging the passengers to flee. People poured out of the front, women clutching children, the elderly shuffling as fast as they could. But the violence at the back of the bus was trapping those further back. They couldn't get past the attacker. Hank yelled for them to use the emergency exit, but panic had taken hold. They were frozen, huddled in the back, watching the carnage. Then the attacker turned his attention to Hank. He charged down the aisle, a roaring bull headed for the driver's pen. Hank tried to use his seat as a shield, but the man was too fast, too strong. He reached over the seat and began to pummel Hank. Hank felt blows raining down on his head, his arms. He tried to cover up, to protect himself, but he was pinned in the driver's seat with nowhere to go. The attacker grabbed Hank's arm, pulling it away to expose his face, and landed a punch directly to his eye. Hank felt his vision cloud, the pain blinding. He was going to die here, at the hands of a madman on a bus in the middle of Texas. The other passengers tried to pull the man off, but he swatted them away like flies, turning his rage back to Hank with renewed fury. And then, a voice, "Hey, right here." It was young, clear, and calm. Bang! A gunshot rang out, echoing through the confined space of the bus. The roaring stopped. Hank opened his good eye and looked back. The attacker was curled on the floor, clutching his stomach, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. Standing over him was a young black man, maybe 19 or 20 years old, holding a smoking pistol. He was shaking, his eyes wide with adrenaline and fear. He pointed the gun at the wounded man. "You move, I blow your head off," he said. The fight was gone. The passengers scrambled out the front door, escaping into the cool night air. Hank stumbled out, his face throbbing, his eyes swollen shut. The kid with the gun was a hero, but he didn't act like one. He didn't wait for the applause. Hank tried to tell him to stay, to tell him that the cops would understand, that he saved them all. But the kid just shook his head, terror in his eyes. "It ain't legal. I got to go now." And with that, he vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a bus full of shaken survivors and one very grateful driver. The police arrived, sirens wailing, lights flashing. They secured the scene, arrested the unconscious attacker, and tended to the wounded. Hank gave his statement. But when it came to the shooter, his memory got a little fuzzy. He didn't want that kid, that flawed hero who had done what the law couldn't do in that moment, to go to prison for an unregistered weapon. He knew the system wasn't always kind to young black men with guns, even if they used them to save lives. As Hank sat in the replacement bus later that night, watching the sunrise over the Texas prairie, he reflected on the nature of good and evil. That night, he had seen the absolute worst of humanity, a man willing to beat a stranger to death for nothing. But he had also seen the best, a young man who risked his own freedom to protect people he didn't even know. The kid might have been carrying a gun illegally, might have had a past, but in that split second, he was an angel. Hank realized that heroes aren't always the people in the capes or the uniforms. Sometimes, they are the people in the back row, the ones you don't notice until the moment they decide to stand up. In each of these stories, there is a moment where the narrative tension snaps, replaced by a violent, visceral release. For the man in Scotland, it was the moment he saw the flames licking the night sky. Realizing his sanctuary had become a pyre, the payoff wasn't victory, it was survival. It was the adrenaline-fueled sprint across the field, the physical act of denying his hunters their prize. The satisfaction comes from the knowledge that despite their planning, their malice and their arson, he outsmarted them. He ran through thorns and vaulted fences to ensure that the eyes in the window did not get the last laugh. He stands in the police station, drinking tea, alive while his car is a twisted wreck of metal, a small price to pay for his life. For the woman in Phoenix, the payoff was the shattering of glass. It was the violent, terrifying impact that paradoxically meant safety. The moment the engine block missed her body was the moment the van lost. They wanted her dead, a nameless statistic on a lonely highway. Instead, she became a survivor, living proof that you can cheat death when luck and instinct align. The payoff is quiet. It's the sunrise she sees through the windshield of the patrol car, a luxury she almost didn't have. The men in the van are gone, phantoms dissolving into the dawn, leaving her with the ultimate victory, her heartbeat. For Hank, the payoff was the gunshot. It was a singular, defining sound that cut through the chaos and ended the nightmare. The payoff was the sight of the bully, the tormentor who had terrorized a bus full of innocent people, now curled in a fetal position on the dirty floor. It was the knowledge that the weak had struck back against the strong, and while the hero vanished into the night, escaping before the authorities could complicate his life, the emotional payoff remains with Hank. He knows that justice isn't always delivered by a judge in a robe. Sometimes, it's delivered by a scared kid with a smoking pistol on a bus in the middle of nowhere. That memory of flawed righteousness is better than any gold medal. We often talk about karma as if it's a cosmic vending machine. You put in a good deed, you get a good result. But these stories show us that karma isn't automatic. Sometimes, you have to help it along. You have to run through the dark. You have to swerve at the last second. And sometimes, you have to pull the trigger. These encounters strip away the polite fiction that the world is a safe place. They remind us that we are animals navigating a wilderness, just in cars instead of caves. But they also remind us of the resilience of the human spirit. Whether it's the instinct to flee, the reflex to dodge, or the courage to intervene, there is a spark in us that refuses to go quietly into the night. It's easy to look at these stories and feel fear. It's easy to want to stay inside, lock the doors, and never venture onto the road again. But there is a lesson here, too. Be aware. Trust your gut. If a house gives you bad vibes, keep walking. If a van is driving erratically, get off the road. And if you see someone in trouble, don't be a bystander. You don't need a gun to be a hero. Sometimes, you just need to care. The road will always be there, stretching out into the unknown. We can't control the darkness, but we can control how we face it. We can choose to be victims or we can choose to be survivors. As long as there are people willing to fight for their lives and the lives of strangers, the monsters in the shadows will never truly win. If these stories kept you on the edge of your seat, or if they made you think twice about your next late-night drive, make sure to smash that like button to let the algorithm know you want more deep-dive true crime stories just like this. Drop a comment below and tell me about the creepiest thing that's ever happened to you on a road trip. Did you see something you couldn't explain? Or did you just have a really weird encounter at a gas station? I want to hear your stories. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video. We release new terrifying tales every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And we go live on Sundays and Wednesdays to hang out and chat with you all. If you want to support the channel and get early access to these narrations, check out the Patreon link in the description or click that join button for member perks. Thanks for listening, friends. And remember, keep your eyes on the road, your doors locked, and stay safe out there. See you in the next video.